The birth of the Polygon. In the vast, empty, frozen steppes of Kazakhstan, a place was born that was meant to be erased from every map. It was officially called Semipalatinsk 21, but to the soldiers and the scientists who lived behind its barbed wire, it was simply the Polygon. In the late 1940s, under the cold, calculating eye of Lavrenti Beria, the Soviet Union chose this patch of Earth to become the center of a new, terrifying era. They didn't just build a military base, they built a ghost city, Kurchatov, where the elite of the Soviet nuclear program lived in luxury, while they prepared to set the world on fire. The city of the invisible Kurchatov was a bubble of silence in a sea of radiation, a city that didn't exist on any Soviet postal route. Here, scientists ate caviar and drank fine wine while calculating the yield of human lives. They looked out their windows at the steppe, watching the distant villages of Meshach and Sarzhal, knowing exactly what was coming. On the morning of August 29th, 1949, the silence of the steppe was broken forever. The ground didn't just shake, it moaned as the first Soviet atomic device, RDS-1, tore a hole in the sky. The sun rose twice that morning, and the second sun was a blinding, radioactive fire that stays in your bones. Forever. The human shadow. While the world feared the mushroom cloud, the residents of the nearby villages were told to stay in their homes, or worse, to step outside and watch the spectacle. Soldiers were stationed in trenches just miles from the blast, protected by nothing but thin cotton uniforms and a desperate, foolish belief in their leaders. The state wanted to know. They needed to know how the human body would react to the invisible fire. This wasn't just a weapons test. It was the beginning of a 40-year experiment where the subjects were unaware they were even participating. As the dust settled, the shadow of the blast wasn't on the ground. It was burned into the DNA of the people below. The silent harvest. When the black rain began to fall, the scientists in Kurchatov didn't bring medicine. They didn't bring clean water. They brought clipboards, Geiger counters, and cameras. They watched as the livestock collapsed in the fields, and they waited for the humans to do the same. Every headache, every purple bruise, every child born with eyes that couldn't see was a data point in the secret ledgers of the Polygon. The harvest had begun, and it was a harvest of suffering that would last for generations. Biology under fire. By the 1960s, the Polygon had transformed from a testing ground into a silent, sprawling graveyard of genetic code. The radiation didn't just kill, it rewrote the very blueprints of life itself. In the maternity wards of the villages surrounding the blast zones, a heavy, suffocating silence began to fall. Mothers were no longer met with the sound of crying babies, but with the terrified whispers of nurses who had seen too much. A generation was being born with what the locals called the Polygon mark. These were the children of the atomic age, born into a world that had already decided their lives were worth less than the secrets they carried in their blood. The living specimen. The deformities were not accidents. They were the documented results of intentional exposure. Children were born with extra limbs, missing eyes, or skin that appeared to have been melted by an invisible sun before they ever took their first breath. The Soviet doctors, dressed in their stiff, lead-lined coats, didn't offer comfort or a cure. They stood by with tape measures and cameras, recording every mutation, every cry, every failure of the human form. To the state, these were not children. They were specimens, a rare opportunity to observe the long-term effects of ionizing radiation on the human species. The closed ward, Dispensary Number 4, deep within the restricted zones. A secret facility was established, known in the shadows as Dispensary Number 4. This was the point of no return. It was here that the most scientifically interesting cases were brought for permanent observation. Behind double-locked steel doors and soundproofed walls, the victims were kept in a state of suspended agony. They were measured, photographed, and experimented upon until the very moment their hearts gave out. The scientists wanted to know how long a body could survive when its cells were literally falling apart from the inside out. They watched the clock, and they waited for the end, the preservation of a horror. Even death provided no escape from the Polygon. When a patient in the closed ward finally died, the experiment simply moved to the basement. The bodies were dissected with military precision, their irradiated organs harvested and preserved in glass jars of formaldehyde. These jars were labeled with numbers, never names, and stored in vast underground vaults to be studied by future generations of the Soviet nuclear machine. This was biology stripped of its soul, reduced to a library of biological wreckage left behind by the invisible fire. Living in the fallout for over 40 years. The people of the Kazakh steppe lived under a sky that regularly turned to a terrifying, blinding fire. They didn't just witness the explosions, they inhaled them. Every day they ate the dust that settled on their crops. They drank the water from the irradiated lakes, and they breathed the thick, oily, black rain that fell after every test. The Soviet government knew, with mathematical precision, exactly what was happening to these people, but they didn't stop it. In fact, they encouraged the local populations to remain exactly where they were, turning an entire region into a living, breathing, biological sensor. The tainted chain. The experiment was designed to track the journey of death through the food chain. Scientists monitored how the isotopes traveled from the scorched soil into the grass, then into the cattle, and finally, into the mother's milk. It was the largest, most sustained human experiment in history, conducted on hundreds of thousands of souls without a single word of consent. Imagine living in a world where the very air you breathe is a state secret, and the water in your well is a slow-acting poison and designed to see how long it takes for your organs to fail. Wait, this wasn't war, it was harvesting. The screams of the earth, witnesses from that time, speak of the earth itself groaning, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated in the soles of their feet after the underground tests. The ground would ripple like a dark ocean, cracking open the very foundations of their homes. Huge, jagged craters appeared overnight, filled with glowing toxic water that the children were told was holy or healing by local officials who were too afraid to tell the truth. And through the thick glass of their lead-shielded towers, the scientists watched. They they took notes on the psychological collapse of these communities, recording the sudden spikes in madness, the suicides, and the absolute, crushing despair. The price of power. To the men in Moscow, the people of the Polygon were as expendable as the stray dogs and goats they tethered to the blast sites. They called it acceptable loss. But there is nothing acceptable about a mother watching her child turn to dust, or a father realizing that his very presence is poisoning his family. The Polygon was a place where the human soul was stripped of all value, leaving behind nothing but a ledger of radioactive data and the hollow wind of the steppe. The fire may have been invisible, but the scars, they were permanent. The closing of the gates. In 1991, as the Soviet Union finally began to crumble under the weight of its own secrets, the gates of the Polygon were officially slammed shut. Led by the poet Olja Suleimanov, and the Nevada Semipalatinsk, movement, the Kazakh people rose up and demanded an end to the madness. Newly independent Kazakhstan did something unthinkable. It renounced the world's fourth largest nuclear arsenal, a legacy of fire it never asked for. But while the military convoys left, the experiment didn't stop. You cannot close a place where the dirt itself is a weapon and the water in the wells is a ticking clock. The shadow of the Polygon simply shifted from a state secret to a permanent, lived reality. The forgotten survivors, the Kazakh Hibakusha today. Over 1.5 million people are recognized as victims of the Polygon, the forgotten Hibakusha of the East. But the state support they receive is often a hollow gesture. A few coins for a lifetime of genetic wreckage. In the villages of the steppe, a strange, haunting psychology has taken root. Some of the survivors have begun to call themselves mutants, a new breed of human that has adapted to the poison. They say, the air is toxic, the food is toxic. And yet, we live. It is a form of survival based on a terrible, dark pride. The only thing left when your own biology has been betrayed by your government. The scars in the steppe. If you walk the grounds of the Polygon today, you will find the atomic lake, or Lake Chagan, a massive crater filled with radioactive water, created by an underground blast, meant for peaceful engineering. The water is a deep, unnatural blue, and the radiation levels remain 100 times higher than what is safe for any living soul. Scientists at the National Nuclear Center in Kurchatov still monitor the site, but they are fighting a ghost. Studies have shown that DNA mutations in these regions are up to 80% higher than the national average. The fire of 1949 is still burning inside the cells of great-grandchildren who were born decades after the last blast. The metallic taste. The men in the lead-lined coats are long gone. But the Dispensary Number 4 still haunts the collective memory of the steppe. The Polygon is not a museum. It is a silent warning. A monument to what happens when a nation decides that its own people are nothing more than material for the future. As the sun sets over the craters today, the wind still carries a strange, faint, metallic taste. The experiment didn't end in 1991, it just became eternal. This has been Russian Dark Stories. The past is never truly buried. It is just waiting for the next generation to uncover it. Who sleep well if you can.